I'm Dan Smolen. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit, so that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day, everyone. Dan Smolen from What's Your Work Fit? Happy Tree Pollen Day here from the Middle Atlantic United States, where it is coating everything, including my lungs. I apologize for the froggy throat. Let's get to it. If you are new to What's Your Work Fit, welcome. We love having you as part of our community. And if you haven't done so already, start first by linking up with us first on our LinkedIn What's Your Work Fit page. Just hit that blue oval. We're also on the What's Your Work Fit YouTube channel, and you can hit subscribe there. Next up, join us on Substack at dansmolen.substack.com. This is my one-stop shopping area for you. It's a place where you can read up on our latest postings or switch over to live and pre-recorded shows, video clips, and also our audio podcast. You can subscribe at dansmolen.substack.com. This is a great community as well. It's growing nicely. And last but not least, if you haven't done so already, tell 5 friends to subscribe to What's Your Work Fit on all of these platforms, on LinkedIn for LinkedIn Live, on our What's Your Work Fit YouTube page, and also on our Substack. We're growing this community one person at a time, sometimes 5 at a time, and we really appreciate all that you're doing to engage with us. Thank you so much. One last thing, this is going to be the last show of a very short season. The reason for that is I'm about to move in May, next month. I'm going to be taking ownership of a brand new place. I haven't lived in an owned home now for 11 years. That's a long story, but we're moving into a brand new place that I've been able to design for our next podcast studio. So as that progresses, I'll gladly put up our progress photos across all of our social media. Well, let's get to it. It is my great pleasure to introduce our returning champion, Chris Moeller. How are you, sir?
Covered in pollen as well.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine.
Thank you very much for having me be a repeat offender.
A repeat offender. Yes. So Chris is the founder of Pathway Communities. We're going to get into that in a moment. And that and him, they're focused on stabilizing housing costs through construction science and creating capacity, data, compute, and storage for the future economy. Nice work if you can get it, brother.
Yeah, thanks, man. We figured we would aim high.
Absolutely. Let's bring in our co-host today from LiquidSpace CEO Mark Gilbreath. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to see you both, fellas.
And last but not least, Fran Saele, managing principal at Marta Vita. How are you today, Fran?
Just fine, Dan. No pollen here in Cincinnati.
Oh,
and great to be with this team.
It's on the way, Fran. I promise you. I promise you. Well, let's get right to it. So, Chris, wrapping up this season, we wanted to get to the idea of livable communities, and we're just going to start off with the question, are livable communities the result of work fit? Help our audience out here.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty broad way to get started, but I think we all agree that work and living are converging, right? Where we do our work, how we do our work,
Right.
where we want to live, that work, live, play sort of mantra is colliding. And that's sort of the basis of design associated with stability is how do we work and live and play in the same place?
Can you tell us about what we're looking at on the screen here?
Yeah, sure. So this is our basis of design. Specifically, this house currently sits in the small town of Granite Falls, North Carolina. It was designed and installed by a guy by the name of Rob Howard, who owns a company called Howard Building Science. He's on the board of directors for Pathway Communities. And it's our basis of design. We wanted to see if we could build a house in a factory that we could build full volumetric with building science to building science standards and have it delivered to a foundation pad ready place in 10 weeks or less. And that's exactly what we did.
Now, this community is up towards the mountains, is it?
It is. It's just north of Hickory, south of Boone, North Carolina. So reason for basis of design is post-Hurricane Helene. I think we have talked about that. Western North Carolina back on September 27th to 24 had Hurricane Helene, close to 10,000 square miles of damaged space. So we really are in our basis of design trying to figure out how can we build back better and more resilient post-catastrophe Helene.
I'm interested in manufactured design because the place that my wife and I are building is, for all intents and purposes, a manufactured dwelling. And what's really interesting about that is how quickly the framing and the drywall and everything moves along when the parts are manufactured, when you're not dealing with 2x4s.
Yeah. So as part of this, if we dig into basis of design a little bit, is the methodology behind it. This is full volumetric. So this house actually came in two pieces.
Wow.
Two different trucks. The floor was in, the drywall was in, the ceiling fans were in, the kitchen was in, the kitchen counters were in, the bathrooms were completed and tiled. So the only thing that was left to do once it arrived was to finish the roof, to build the front porch, and to build the exterior trim and fenestration.
And all the hookups.
Of course, yeah, and hook everything up to water, sewer, and power.
So I'm wondering if you can take us through the livable community concept that you're working on here. If I take you through some slides, would you talk to them?
Yeah, sure. So if we move to, so this is Hudson Commons. This is our first living learning lab is what we're calling it. This is about 15 miles north of Granite Falls.
Okay.
This is about 45 units of what we're calling missing middle product. Missing middle gets it's sort of described differently in different circles. This is not about missing middle class. This is about product that doesn't exist in a specific market. So in Hudson, North Carolina, there are a lot of grandma 1950s, 60s ranch and Euclidean zoning style, like on an acre or two, single family ranch style homes. Not necessarily ideal for the next generation of single folks or civil servants, people looking to live in a smaller community that's walkable. So this is missing middle product, meaning that we are designing this from 500 square foot studios to just under 1,200 square foot standalone walkout homes, as you just saw before in that last house.
Okay, we'll move forward here.
Yeah, so it's the second design is just whether or not we want to stack the townhouses at the south end of that plan. I think that we're moving more in this direction as walkable townhomes, more walkout style. The downtown area of Main Street Hudson is just off the screen to the right. So it's all walking distance to coffee shops and breweries and hardware stores.
Okay. Moving right along. So you got a lot of things going on here within this livable community. And I'm wondering if you could talk to it.
This is the common. So maybe the next slide's a little bit better because it shows the old house being repurposed. It's an old 1950s style brick ranch. And what we're doing is we're breaking this up into a community kitchen, co-working space for third space folks for to get out of their studios, as well as short-term overnight rentals. So we're going to take the bedrooms and turn those into overnight rentals for visiting guests. And then communal space, outdoor fire pits, probably raised bed gardens, depending on what the community decides that they want to do. But rather than tearing the house down and starting from scratch, we decided to reimagine what this could potentially look like if we kept it.
And this is the reimagination, I suppose. Very nice.
Yeah, that's the reimagination. So think of it as a commons. This is an area where people will go when they're not in their homes. We have such a problem with wellness and isolation these days, especially with work from home. The idea behind this commons is really to gather, to eat, to break bread, to share recipes, to co-work, or potentially, rent for one of your overnight guests, and just the casual collision of what we call a traditional workplace.
So this is one of those granny ranches that you're talking about here.
It is.
And so but ranches are great because they're easy to build up and build out. You and I grew up in Orange, Connecticut, the home of the split level, which I hate. But this is great because it's so modularized. So what you did here with this granny ranch is it became a communal center. Do I have that right?
That's right. And it's all, so the concept behind the Community for Hudson Commons is stable living for civil servants. So specifically nurses, police, fire, and medic, first responders. It's on a microgrid, which is kind of an interesting concept. We went down this path about maybe 18 months ago and realized now that we've got this onslaught of data centers. In fact, Google just announced another $1 billion investment in a data center to the town to the north called Lenore, that we can partner with Duke Energy and create a resilient grid by creating microgrids. So rather than adding load and capacity to their traditional grid, we're going to microgrid this to photovoltaics and renewables and keep all of that load of 54 houses off of their central grid to free it up for other uses.
And you illustrate the panels on the roof there.
That's right. And they'll be on every unit. We're in the process of doing our load calculations now to figure out how close we are to getting to net zero energy, where folks just simply won't have a power bill.
Thanks for taking us through that. Fran, take it over.
Okay, Dan, thanks. Chris, this is really interesting stuff. And, all of us observed the terrible destruction in Appalachia. And actually, I had a chance to drive through it last year. And it really was devastating. And it still was in pretty bad shape, as I understand it, in many places. But I'm just curious, if we could go back to the initial home that was shown. I would just be curious to understand a little bit more about the economics there and how that works within your community.
Give me a second. I got to bring it up.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
This is 1,200 square feet, the 2-story home. What are you selling these homes? Are these leased? Are they, how is that structured?
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit and explain sort of what basis of design is. This was a fellow developer 7 miles down the road that had a pad ready spot for us to build this house. So it was basically think of it as an experiment. What sort of building performance can we get, and how can we work with our closest factory partners to get to building performance in a full volumetric delivery? So like I said, this came in 2 pieces and it was fully built, which means the only tradespeople that we needed really were our horizontal civil folks to prep the spot. And then, of course, our mechanical, electrical, plumbing folks to come in and tie everything into the existing systems. So what we got out of that basically was a high performance building without needing, without the weather delays and the gap in trade labor shortages that we traditionally face in Hickory, North Carolina.
Got it. Well, so if you were to sell this home, I assume it's sold to somebody. Is this a traditional purchase? Is it? There's obviously in a community and things like the common area, the common services and the property there, the kind of a community center. That's all available as part of this, and there's some fees for that. But that works for the economics of the population in this neighborhood. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this one is considered a market rate house. So it is on the market currently. As of last week, we just got our final inspection and we decided to sell it off because it did exactly what we needed it to do to get us to past our thesis.
Okay.
So this home is currently listed at $299,500. So it's under $300,000, just under 1,200 square feet. And it is not net zero energy ready, but it did receive a 2.6 ACH 50, which puts it in the very good rating for home efficiency.
Okay.
You're looking at about $1,200 a year to heat and cool this house and heat and cool the water associated with usage.
So at $300,000 for 1,200 square feet, I just do the math. What is that a square foot to?
Plus land and improvements, it's somewhere around 250, I guess. I could do the math. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. All right. And that would be competitive, you would think, in the marketplace generally for this type of facility.
Well, I mean, so you look at the area median income at $68,000, and this would be under $2,000 for a mortgage. So
Right.
yeah, and you're gaining equity, right? Because it's a traditional ownership model. So
Okay.
all signs point are responsible for this house.
So this concept works in this market, given the special conditions of the market. Would it be safe to say that you could take the concept and move it to other communities where the existing situations are similar to some extent, but very different in terms of the local markets? Is that an initiative that you think makes sense? And how would that be orchestrated by someone who is interested in doing that? Other than talking with you, I suspect, or
yeah, the financial due diligence on our Hudson Commons project was pretty tough, actually. A certified financial planner will advise that no more than 25% of your gross income should go to rent.
right?
And, so the way that we go about doing our market demographics to figure out feasibility is actually starting there. What does that mean if you're a firefighter working in Boone, North Carolina? What does that mean if you're a shift nurse or registered nurse working in Hickory, North Carolina? And we have to back into those numbers, because if we come in at 45% of their gross income, then is it a responsible living situation, or are they stretching? So to answer your question a little bit more specifically, it's all based on area median income, and then trying to stay true to the metrics of CFP would keep us at 25% of our gross income going to rent.
Okay. All right. So again, the concept, the underlying concept is the idea of living, working, and playing within proximity to one another, and that you have this here as opposed to the more traditional live here, work there, that sort of thing. At the other end of the extreme is Adam Newman there with Flow. I mean, it's essentially the same idea, where he's building residential and a little bit of commercial and a little bit of retail, office and retail within walking distance. Is it the same mindset, just applied at a different level of potential buyer?
Honestly, Fran, I haven't looked at Newman's Flow product since, the Crazy Rays. When it gets to that kind of scale, it's just sort of a whole different beast. I don't even know if that's an ownership model or if it's an NOI rental model.
Well, it's a public company if you can get through the prospectus. But
it's probably for rent. Most multifamily market rate developers are looking at heads and beds and door counts for net operating income, which is a totally different model than trying to provide ownership and stability for, basic area median income.
Okay. Thanks. This is great stuff, by the way.
Hey, thanks.
Mark, you're on mute. There you go.
Really cool, Chris. You've talked a lot, I think, with regards to Hudson Commons on the notion of resilience versus sustainability, I think, and that we should move beyond sustainability and look at principles of resilience. Can you break that down for us, kind of in plain English a little bit, and maybe illustrate how that's sort of being applied at Hudson Commons, if it is there?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's a great question, because what ends up happening in the aftermath of a hurricane is you have lots of lessons learned, and you start to realize where your weaknesses are in terms of your ability to recover or thrive. Hurricane Helene was a little bit different than a lot of other hurricanes in that it was in the mountains. They lost all infrastructure, so there was no cell phone. All the aerial, it's all granite rock, so there is no underground. So in Florida, they bury all the utilities which generally means that you've got some cell service or some Wi-Fi service or some power service. The mountains, everything's delivered aerial, and the road systems, the landslides really closed out the road system. So people were cut off from everything, all forms of communication in every layer, which made disaster recovery and recovery response very difficult. Even the LZs, the landing zones for Operation Airlift that came out of Hickory were very, very tight. Those pilots were very skilled in taking a lot of dangerous flights to get folks out or to drop off imperative meds like insulin and what have you. So what we learned is that we needed to have a much better network and node disaster recovery and response center process. And that's really what this is. You know, if we look at it through the lens of civil servants, we have our first responders all living in a pocket neighborhood in a cottage court style home. They have a community kitchen that and co-working, which will be up all the time because we will rely on renewables if the grid goes down, and we'll have the ability to cook and prepare. So the basement of that commons home has the 12 highest used SKUs for disaster recovery. So tarps, solar panels, water, flashlights, the like. And that area then becomes a resilience hub for disaster recovery moving forward.
Well, and you mentioned that it's that the target customer for Hudson Commons is a civil servant. You know, you mentioned firemen, nurses, et cetera, which I can totally relate to. Are for them in the proposition about Hudson Commons and the things that you've built into it functionally, including the shared experiences, community kitchen, co-working, and so forth, will it be to will the buyer, the customer, need to sort of buy into that value prop and pay something more for that additional amenity? Is there a premium that they're going to have to wrap their head around as compared to, moving into or buying the stick frame construction standalone property, down the boulevard? Like, are they buying disaster insurance in essence in these amenities and the resilience that you built in, or is that cost subsidized somehow, some way? So who pays for that resilience?
Ooh. Yeah, it's a great question. So one, they shoulder the expense because we have 45 units to sell. So with this first one, we have CDBG money, which is disaster recovery money from FEMA. So Western North Carolina is flush with grant opportunities and proposals for disaster recovery and resilience. We know that that's not scalable. We can't rely on that once we move off of Hudson Main Street to an area not in Appalachia that doesn't have disaster recovery money. But there are plenty of partners out there that are heavily subsidized, whether it's Community Reinvestment Act or Bank On. The FDIC pays into this sort of relief and recovery. So no, they don't necessarily pay a premium, but they do receive the benefit of the shared experience of resilience.
Yeah. And if maybe just a quick follow up, if I may, Dan. Yeah, Chris. Sure. I get it. Like I can relate to the depth of the tragedy. I can relate to and well imagine the government and local community response in terms of, hey, we got to put dollars. We got to make sure that this doesn't happen again this way. So whether it's grants or infrastructure or zoning or the like, we got to make sure that we've got more resilient, communities. I can also imagine in practice that, we might not have another event like this for 50 years, or we might have 5 in the next 5 years. It's like sort of hard to know. Right. And so I'm curious how you think about, because like, let's say it's the better of those two. Let's say we don't have another one of these for 50 years. Mm-hmm. And those civil servants, they're going to the office or they're going to the fire station or the hospital. They don't need the co-working space. Another disaster doesn't hit. The communal kitchen isn't needed. Like how do you think about ensuring the utility and the actual use of those expensive amenities that were put in dealing with the uncertainty of tragedies, but also the alternative uses? Like is that even in the calculus?
I'm not sure I understood the question, but let me try to answer it this way. Currently, civil servants can't live and serve in the same community. They're traveling an hour and a half in to service whatever the needs of the greater community are.
Right.
So we don't look at this as an amenity. We don't look at this as an opportunity to use it in disaster recovery only. It's there every day. Mm-hmm. So we suspect that this community will use the community kitchen on the daily. People will be sitting around a fire pit at night. People will be using the co-working space because they work 4 on 3 off, or their spouse is at home doing something different. It'll allow them to have 1 car, rather than 2 cars, because the other person who's home can walk to downtown for meetings. The community can use the space because the community and the civil servants that serve the community are one and the same. So we don't really look at it as an on switch, off switch, waiting for another disaster. We look at it as sort of a layer of stability, more as infrastructure, that we've stabilized our living situation for our nurses and civil servants, so they don't have to worry about how much a Big Mac costs next week.
Yeah. Clear. Thanks.
So Stephen Cote has a comment, and he says he's currently working with funders to build community social connection and resilience hubs, very connected concepts, as an integrated social infrastructure element with hyper-local neighborhoods across the country. I guess this goes to Fran's earlier point of how scalable is this concept, or is it really more to do with what's happening specifically within that community hub?
Well, so our vision is that this happens in any neighborhood. It's a rural economic development opportunity. If there's a main street, then there's an on-ramp for this. And we see it really as an on-ramp and an off-ramp. The beginning of your career as an incubator from, say, 20 to 30. Dan, you wrote a heartfelt post about your daughter getting a job as an ED nurse this week. And that's who we're building it for. We want her to have an opportunity with her partner to stabilize her cost of living for a decade. And then we kind of want to kick her out of the nest, to be honest. We want to incubate some of her living expenses to a point where she can participate as a well-qualified 20% down 30-year fixed buyer in 8 to 10 years, because she has saved money, and she could save money because she was living in a place that gave her a rate of return rather than, a roof over her head. So in terms of scalability, that's the on-ramp that we call it into the workforce, is say 20 to 30. But then, as we know, Social Security benefits in 2037 are going to be at the highest that they are with retirees and boomers, folks looking to get out of the workforce. We're losing more people in the workforce than we're gaining right now. So those folks also need stability as they move out of their family home, or they decide that they want to move into retirement, or maybe just get a second gig working for LiquidSpace and Mark, and not going to the office every day, but supporting work from anywhere processes. Those folks need stability too. And I'm looking at all 4 of us in that same bucket.
So my daughter is in the Hampton Roads region of Virginia, which is immense. It's bigger than some states of the Union. In her particular town, Suffolk City, actually, it's not a county there. It's the city of Suffolk is the size of like 3 counties. It's immense. That's a very old community. That goes back to the Revolutionary War. So the question becomes 2 things. How does one identify a mature or old community with a lot of old neighborhood that's maybe, like you described, those granny ranches, or maybe shotgun dwellings or something like that? How does that rise up to opportunity? And then I'll add to that Rob's comment, which is, how do you get past those local archaic zoning regulations?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. So there's a lot of discussions about housing challenge in America right now, and I sort of break it into 3 different components. The first one really is about putting a roof over someone's head. That's shelter, right? And that's very different than workforce development, which I kind of consider to be sort of the middle of that. But then the quiet killer right now is ownership, right? Is those first time home buyers. So, it's not that we're running out of housing, we're running out of alignment. Folks don't necessarily want the type of houses that are out there, let alone the cost to be, you know, our median home right now in America, single family homes over $450,000.
Indeed.
So at this point, you know, it really becomes an inventory issue associated with what the American dream looks like. And Fran and I kind of laughed and went back and forth on a post on LinkedIn about this earlier today and yesterday. You know, what does the American dream look like to younger folks? And let me tell you, it doesn't look like Granny's Ranch.
No, but it's one of stability, and it's one of connection. You know, us four guys grew up in a different type of paradigm for the American dream based on consumerism and abundance and getting mega-sized homes and so forth. That's not what my daughter wants. My daughter wants stability. She wants to be able to build some equity. You know, she's about to turn 25. You know, 100 years ago when I was her age, I was already into my first built home. And that's a tough conversation to have with your child. Mm-hmm. But she's recalibrating to something of, I want stability. I want to build equity. I also want to build friendships. I want to have community. You know, when you're a nurse working in a hospital 36 hours a week, which is 3 shifts of 12 hours. So you've got the other 4 days to either sleep or to engage, right?
Yep.
So what's the secret sauce of that? Because you could still build something beautiful, mm-hmm. and people will not necessarily participate.
Yeah. 2 thoughts and all great points, Dan. One, I always like to say to people that the future of housing is not a ladder, it's a loop. A lot of people don't want to climb up because then they've got to hang on to something that's big and maintain it when everybody leaves. It's a loop. That's what the future is telling us. The second thing is, you know, I'm working as a mentor right now in the Housing Innovation Challenge, which is 20 schools, universities across the country that are working for the Housing Innovation Alliance. And actually, there's a Housing Innovation workshop or conference that's here in Charlotte in May. And our project is going to be on the bus tour. I say that it's an hour away, so it's not on the literal bus tour, but we're going to do a presentation around what we're building. And the reality is that entry without stability is fragile, right? And the exit without that structure can be right. Isolating. So the design theory is the second thing that comes to my mind. And you have to design these right, just like we had to design the office right. Pocket neighborhoods and cottage courts are a very compact way to create community. And there is some art to it. There's a guy, this book right here, Pocket Neighborhoods by Ross Chapin, is an amazing hardcover book. There's a lot of design theory in how to create this casual collision and how to create a sense of community through proper design, just like there was in our old conversations about the workplace.
So in the 1950s, so what's that now, 70 years ago, Bill Levitt built Levittown primarily because he saw a massive opportunity. It was a massive housing shortage with people coming back from World War II that was satiated by these Levittowns in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the big one in New York. Mm-hmm. And then 60 years ago, and this is the example I'm most familiar with, were the quote unquote planned communities. James Rouse's Columbia, Robert E. Simon's Reston, Virginia, and then the one I lived in, which was Clarence Kettler's Montgomery Village, Maryland. Now, Montgomery Village, Maryland was wonderful. I got to walk to school. I got to walk to the supermarket, pick up dinner from my mom who was working and my dad who was working, ride a bike and never really need a car. I mean, as it is now, had I was a little younger, I could have walked to my high school as well. But the problem with those places is they didn't age well. And the really hard part about it is that the communities just don't look fresh anymore. The trees are big. I don't want to sound like Mitt Romney here, where the trees are the right size, but they were too big. They were too out of scale for the homes, and the homes were often weather beaten, and the community standards were not as fresh as when people moved in. What kinds of things have you learned from those massive scale developed communities to inform the work that you're doing now?
Well, I think the biggest lesson that I learned and how we're going to scale is through decentralized physical infrastructure. So think of this in 20s and 40s, like units of 20 and units of 40. So 2 acres, 3 acres, 1 block away from Main Street, highly walkable. And the reason that that's really important is there's a lot of reasons why it's important, but you just mentioned it, the quality of life associated with being able to walk or ride your bike, the quality of life associated with what that can do for rural economic development for Main Street in terms of walkability, increasing foot traffic and creating that sense of community is really, really important. And you see that in most big cities, wherever there's brownstones and wherever there's walkability in boroughs, those communities are very tight knit. You go to New York City and someone says, everything I need is within 4 square blocks of where I am right now. And that's exactly how we're looking at these things is, can they do all the things that they need to do without depending on all the other infrastructure that they would need? So can they do it without a car, essentially? And how much does that feed back into the quality of life? And that's important because right now, to live in a brownstone in New York City is how many millions of dollars to live in it,
huge.
Right? So
huge.
Recreating that sense of community and recreating all the functional needs associated with living right within a walkable scale, every small town in USA has this opportunity. But to get back to the point that one of the comments that came in said, it's about zoning and planning at that point. Can we actually do what we need to do without the NIMBYs coming out? And that's a different conversation.
And I would imagine that the linchpin for a lot of people to move into these kinds of reimagined communities is, how close am I to a supermarket, right? Those cities that you talk about, New York, I think too about DC, where the closest food place is a bodega. Well, that's full of sometimes processed food. That's not the best thing.
Yeah.
I just want to pivot now, and then we'll get to Fran on all of this. I saw in the renderings what look like community gardens. How important is that going forward?
Well, we're not Disney, so we're not here to theme our communities, but we're getting a lot of feedback that folks want food sovereignty. So one of the things that's really interesting about Hudson, North Carolina, is that it's adjacent to agrarian community. There's a ton of farmland and there's a ton of farmers right outside of the area. So part of that community kitchen is to align with small local producers and create CSAs. So that can be a drop spot for 40 people. And all of a sudden, all of their fresh produce or all of their fresh protein and produce potentially could be community pooled together, where now you're feeding 70 folks. It alleviates those $500 Saturdays where you're trying hard to sell as many tomatoes as you can at the farmer's market, because you've got a CSA that's engaged and you've got a community that's decided that food sovereignty and the quality and nutritional value of their food is important. And it's helpful to be adjacent to those agrarian communities and bring those two concepts together. That's why the community kitchen is there, to food prep.
And for our viewers and listeners, CSA, if you could just define that.
Oh, they're just community service administrations and offerings. It's about food coming in from small local producers to farmers markets and being on a subscription plan.
Sure. Fran?
Chris, if we could re-rack to the concept of the first house business, okay? In America, in the US, the notion historically had been, at least through the 20th century, that families would begin with marriage in the late 20s, and there would be an opportunity for 1, 2, 3 children, and
3.2 children.
Yeah. And that this seemed to be a recurring phenomenon up through, my generation anyway, because I felt it and went through the whole cycle just like everybody else. But in my children, and I know this is felt everywhere today, who are late 20s, 30s. The question is, first of all, when should we be marrying or not? But beyond that, it's, do we want children or not? And as reflected in the current, birth rate, the U.S., like every other country, not quite as bad as Japan, but we're slipping. Okay. which has a rather dramatic impact on both housing that's needed and the economics of the existing inventory. And again, chattering a little bit with you this morning, how is it possible to fix that without going through some dramatic depression in housing valuation? Help me understand where you think that's headed.
Well, it takes a lot of framing. It's an awesome question and one that we have to work on very dynamically. Starting to look at things like GDP and CPI and chain CPI. These units of measurement came out in the early 1900s. Not only that, but the way in which they collect the methodology and report is always in arrears. So you have a very tough time finding dynamic data that supports any of this that's not at least a month, if not a year old, depending on if it's jobs or if it's GDP. And then we have an entire group of bureaucracy and politicians that are making very informed decisions off of these metrics that are 100 years old. So what I do is I kind of frame it this way, right? Every single day in this country, about 220,000 people are entering the workforce and about 230,000 people are leaving it. So there's a net loss. And then on top of that, when we talk about jobs and gains right now, we're on month 3 with 100,000 plus deficit of jobs, plus AI continuing to compress knowledge work. So, that's not growth, that's churn. And it has nothing to do with how many kids we bring into this world. At 1.6, I think, is what we're averaging now at this point. So we're going to see some of this sort of rear its ugly head in the next decade. Not really sure what that means, but to layer on another or to add on, slather on another layer of complexity, we have 6 million people that are, Social Security is adding 6 million people a year as beneficiaries to the 7 million annually right now that are receiving benefits. So we have this massive retirement bubble coming through the hose as well. So that's why we frame this as stable living, and that's why we're framing this as an investment in infrastructure for value and benefit to communities, because we have to stabilize. We have to stabilize something. Maybe not the middle, but maybe the on-ramp of when you get started. The one thing everybody requires you to do when you get out of school is work. They don't require you to get married or have kids, but they require you to work. So if they're going to get right to work straight out of school, then we have to put some sort of on-ramp into stability that doesn't simply go to NOI and private equity straight into rent. We have to provide them some IRR and some stability in terms of an ownership model straight out of school.
Okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, follow up?
Well, I mean, I think we could talk about this the rest of the program, but maybe just your sense of is that trend going to continue for an undetermined length of time, or do you see any movement either way?
It's a great question. This is where I need to try to help see around corners. So it's great to have tools like Trueflation, that are looking at the true cost of things like the egg index and the Big Mac index. You remember Castle Data when we were talking about this return to work thing, which is craziness at the beginning, when I think I spent the first 2 years saying you lost me at Castle Data. It just, I thought it was
White Castle. That's where we lost you.
It simply wasn't. It's simply not a good enough measure. And the same with CPI and GDP now. It's simply lagging. We need more dynamic systems that can help inform more real-time decision making. Look what's happening with gas. In a month and a half, we've seen, a 40%, 50% increase. Well, that fertilizer, same thing's happening. So there's knock-on effects economically that will continue. And until we start to see stability, growth is just not an option.
Okay. Mark?
Chris, how's big equity approaching the housing problem space, compared to smaller developers like yourselves? Yeah,
great question. They're still trying to use the same old pencils and trying to work at scale. I have a box of these construction pencils that I hand out now. And people say, our models don't pencil, and I keep telling them they're using the wrong pencils. So, bringing construction pencils to the table and saying you can build your way out of this is a new way of thinking. There's no new inventory and no creativity, but they're getting there. You're starting to see impact funds, as they're called, with private credit in a pinch, and capital markets in a pinch. Things are getting creative on the financial side. Deal sizes are changing. The idea of value and impact hitting the balance sheet is becoming, I won't say normalized, but it's certainly not the returns that we were growing accustomed to in 15, 16, 17.
But am I right, or rather, to what extent did big equity sort of race into this realm? It seems like that was a headline pretty consistently over the last decade, that they were flooding the zone with product coming in, and was that like, were they building? Like, do you approve of what they were building and delivering, and is it still mobilized, or has it pulled back? I don't know the headlines anymore. I haven't followed it. Yeah,
it's a great question. It's necessary. It's all necessary. Just like money, like capital. We need all energy. We need all money. We need all growth. The economics behind most of our investment industries and vehicles right now are simply constipated. So yes, we still need multifamily. We still need LIHTC. We need affordable housing with vouchers. We need all sorts of housing to be built. Are we oversubscribed to multifamily? And did we build inferior products? And is that lining the pockets of traditional IRR, GPLP? Sure. But
it wasn't a bit like, I'm curious, like, did they, are they, and are they building for the investor, not the young family, or like what, like, I mean, what's your critical take on how that machine, what it's been doing?
Yeah, I think that's, the net operating income model is important. And yes, to the investor, that's important. Where there's not a lot of innovation, Mark, is in the ownership models. You have an existing inventory, and you can go into a bank and you can get a note and pay mortgage insurance if you're not well qualified. And that's really the only option that's out there right now. So, the ownership model is really where the innovation can come in, not the rental model. Because when you leave after a year and a half, you don't own anything. You've given someone else your money after a year and a half.
Is it broadly true that the big equity development surge was non-ownership related product?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
When I was in recruiting, we used to talk about rent to own. We would we would place people as 1099s until either they felt comfortable with the project or the hiring manager felt comfortable hiring them. And as you guys were talking, I was thinking about Rent-A-Center, which used to do that. You get the room full of furniture, absurdly paying, usury rates on the interest, but eventually you got to own it. I'm going to tee up a question for you, Chris, for people in Fran's kids cohort, in my daughter's cohort. Does a rent-to-own model open up opportunities, especially in these kinds of community structures where maybe they don't have the equity yet, they're just got into the workplace, but they need a good place to live, and they're hopeful that they can stay there and build equity? What are your thoughts?
I think, to answer it in a word, maybe, but the rent-to-own model simply have not taken off because folks generally don't get to the ownership side of things. There's just too many other things to spend their money on. So when there's not a priority placed on that ownership model, or when that agreement hasn't been made right from the very beginning of the transaction, it's very difficult to shift from rent to own. And I think that's why those companies made so much money in that rent to own model. You're paying an inflated price on the front end, and with the promise of ownership at some point. Right. But we weren't seeing a lot of conversions. A lot of those TVs from Rent-A-Center went back.
Right.
Not very many of them got purchased. So I think that there's an opportunity there for sure in creative finance to create something that could be more circular and less extractive in that world. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is create something that has more of, less of a barrier to entry and access to this equity, but also is not market rate. And that's kind of where groups like Habitat for Humanity come in. You've got you're decoupling the land from the structure, and you're keeping the structure affordable in perpetuity. So there's some interesting models out there.
One of the challenges of this, and I see it in my daughter and future son-in-law's backyard, is a lot of farms are disappearing for these kinds of big build outs, right? One, because there's nothing on them and they're flat. So you don't have to do a lot of grading and you don't have to remove existing structures, which is expensive. Is that part of the challenge of this, is that it's really not scalable in big numbers that would entice an equity player, right? Like I'm building, I won't mention the name of the company, but they're one of the top 3 home builders in the United States. I call them the home builders industrial complex, completely vertically aligned. They provide everything, including a mortgage broker. But you gotta meet their model as opposed to them meeting your model. And in my daughter's case, her model is a starter home that you can afford and build equity in. So is that part of the problem with this model, is that it can zero in on a community that has good bones, but maybe, as you said, maybe you're dealing within the footprint of 4 or 5 acres as opposed to 40 or 400.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it's scalable, is that, how many towns are there in America? There's a renaissance right now for folks fleeing cities, just as much as the narrative of the opportunities being in the cities. As work continues to be pushed to the fringe and innovation happens at the fringe, people are starting to find value in less expensive, smaller towns. And there are tons of small towns in the US. So that's why it goes back to me saying it's a play on decentralized physical infrastructure, where we can build, say, 45 units of age in place on one side of Main Street. 3 blocks up, we can build 45 units of upward mobility for civil servants, and we can have a coffee shop or a LiquidSpace in the middle. Right. And that's where the casual collision happens, where all of a sudden that community now is well-rounded on both sides and stable on both sides. So I do believe that any town USA can take advantage of pocket neighborhoods and cottage courts. And I think that it's highly scalable across the US.
Any town could. Where you and I grew up, probably less so because of colonial era intransigence, right?
Yeah, Euclidean zoning is a huge issue, especially in the Northeast. Almost everything's on an acre or 2. You have aging populations that are well heeled in their equity model, right, and they also don't have anywhere to go. My mom is one of those people.
Right. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us again. For those people out there who are not familiar with you, how would they find you on social media? How would they learn more about what we talked about today? And point them in your direction. Where would they find you?
Yeah, well, LinkedIn is always kind of where I engage. I write on Substack. My Substack is called Chasing Arrows. I have a podcast called The Edge Report, as we're shifting from bricks to clicks, we like to call it. So we like to explore the edge. Pathwayscommunity.org is where you can find our community model. And soon, once we get past our design development phase next week, Hudson-Commons will be our website for our for sale product, and our first product that will land here in North Carolina.
Well, congratulations for all of this. It looks fantastic. And I give you a lot of props for being part of the leadership of this new way of thinking. We got to get to our last question. I know we've asked you this before. We'll ask you again. What's your work fit, Chris? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes the work that you do a wonderful part of your day, doing other wonderful things, and not the all-consuming time suck of the day? What's your work fit?
It's an awesome question again. And, I'm just lucky to get out of bed every day and work on this concept of stable living. Honestly, it's stable living. And, the idea that we can create housing as an ecosystem rather than a capital markets play for equity, it can be a part of our investment strategy, but stable living really as a mindset to, create new opportunities in infrastructure investment that are not just simply based in capital markets, but help people be stable and work better. That's what I try to do.
It's a wonderful work fit. Sorry for the shortened season, folks. I'm moving, but we'll see you again in September. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This is a great show.
Happy
We'll
summer.
see- Happy summer.
Thank you, guys.